Welcome to, hello everyone. Welcome to the Seattle Zoning Maps workshop. And we're going to give everyone a few minutes to get started. And I'm going to let Kate take it away.
Thank you, Laura. Thank you everyone for being here. My name is Kate Rubin. I am the organizing director of Be Seattle. My pronouns are she, her, and I am joined tonight by my co-director, Tanya Moore, who is going to be doing tech support. Um, and then our wonderful guest speakers who have planned a really excellent workshop tonight where we're all going to learn a lot. Based on some of the names that I saw being admitted and who retweeted this, I think we have a lot of urbanists in the room. So I did want to introduce Be Seattle for folks who aren't aware of us. We are a very small grassroots renter advocacy and empowerment organization, and we focus on the intersection of renters and people experiencing homelessness because most of us are much closer to ever becoming homeless than really having true stability. I'm really excited for you all to be here today, where we can kind of talk about this intersection of being renters and the impacts of zoning. And I just wanted to explain building tenant power workshops. We've been doing these for, I think, about 3 years. And before that, we were doing Know Your Rights boot camps, which we still do Know Your Rights training sometimes. And we are funded by the City of Seattle Department of Construction and Inspections to teach renters about their rights and to educate them on renter issues. So I also really need to share with you SDCI. They are the ones who are responsible for enforcing landlord-tenant laws. They have the Renting in Seattle helpline. And so if you're ever experiencing any issues with your landlord, that is the number that you're going to want to call. And I am emphasizing it more than usual because the city council recently voted to defund tenant services by about $1 million. We're going from, I think, 2.5 million that funds 10 organizations, including the Housing Justice Project and Solid Ground, Tenant Law Center, to, I think, about, I did the math because they took some money out and added a little bit less than they took out, about 1.6 million. So that means that a lot of the organizations who are providing any kind of renter education or advocacy or organizing may not be in these spaces or available as much as they have been in the past. Be Seattle, we are primarily funded by the City of Seattle, and we're a two-person organization, Tanya and me, you're seeing us. And this is our full-time job. So we're not quite sure what the future is going to look like for us as an organization, or honestly for us personally. It's kind of a scary time, and it's a scary time for renters too. There's been a big shift politically. We're expecting a bigger shift with national politics at the end of the year, and people are going to be probably coming into Seattle at pretty high numbers. So we really need to talk about how to make this city welcoming and how to make sure that renters are empowered. Sorry to be kind of like a bummer in that space. It's something that we're all kind of coping with. So we are hoping to be able to continue at least some of the work that we've been doing for renters. These workshops have really ranged on a wide variety of topics, from elders to the disabled community, and we really want to be here for you, but we also want to be honest about what could potentially be limited capacity in the future. And so with that and sharing that, and I'm going to get a link to our sorry, I just lost my word for it, to our our renter resource guide that will help guide you to the places that at least currently are able to provide some services and support for tenants. And that'll live on for a while. And so with that, I would like to hand this workshop over to Laura Lowe, who is a board member and a real longtime supporter of Be Seattle. And she also volunteers with Share the Cities. Laura, please take it away. Thank you so much for being here.
Hi, everybody. I'm using Google Slides for the first time, so I apologize in advance to everybody here, but it's never too late to learn how to do something, right? So if you're here tonight, you're choosing to spend your Wednesday night at the Building Tenant Power Workshop. So you probably care a lot about renters, so good for you. That's awesome. Even if you're not one, everybody should care about renters in their community. We make up more than half the city, 55%. We're going to be talking about zoning maps. If you're somebody that knows what an LR3 zone is, or NC commercial something zone, or what floor area ratio is, this is probably not the right place for you. So if you are the kind of urbanist that wants to talk about the supplementary zoning, neighborhood, residential, blah, 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 floor area ratio amounts, this is not, you're not at the right place. So there's lots of other resources out there to wonk out. If you want to get wonky here, try to keep it to a minimum. This is really for folks that, you know, are really trying to understand. I heard that there's this big plan happening. Why should I care about it? So we're really talking about why should you engage both right now on the zoning maps and then in the winter in the zoning hearings. So we really want to turn out renters to the zoning hearings. Does anyone have any questions about that? We're not kicking you wonks out, but we're just saying that, you know, this is a renter, like, why should renters know and understand the comp plan about what it is? Cool. Today's presentation, we're gonna have some community agreements. We're gonna hear from Shirley. We're gonna talk about, Laura's gonna talk a bit. We're gonna try to have some breakout rooms. We're gonna have some reflections on our breakout rooms. We're gonna hear Ryan speak at around 7:10 or so. Have another breakout room, have some more reflections from the breakout rooms, and then we're gonna have time to comment on the comprehensive plan. If you get really excited and want to comment on the comprehensive plan before that, go ahead. You can multitask. We won't be offended. But at the very end, we're going to actually show you the City of Seattle's website and the way that they want you to give your comment. And we also have a website from Share the Cities that helps you generate your comment and think about how to comment about this. But yeah, that's what we're doing. So community agreements are just leave space for renters. Renters is a renter first space. Leave space for kind of intersectional approach to speaking, which means, you know, if you're taking up a lot of airtime and you're from a community that has long been overrepresented in land use and renter discussions or housing and land use discussions, just be mindful of that. And if someone, you know, kind of tries to recenter the conversation on renters, just, you know, try to recognize why we're doing that. Because we've all been in those meetings where people with the means to have secure housing kind of further marginalized renters. Does anyone have any question about that? Cool. So I made a study guide for this. It's not done yet, but I'll share it out afterwards. We can send it out in an email. So there's going to be a study guide that I can share it afterwards. Who am I? I've lived in Seattle for 15 years. I want to live near parks and near transit. I only drive about 5,000 miles a year. I just learned how to ride a bike 4 years ago. As a former teacher and bus driver, I was born in Colombia. and I was brought here to the US as an adoptee. I have a lot of passion for immigration and climate. People are going to move here for climate reasons to Seattle. And I strongly believe that the root cause of homelessness is our bad zoning. Like, I think there's a to B direct link. I don't think we talk about it enough. And so I do strongly have a bias that I'm just saying up front so folks know that's where I'm coming from. Next up, we've got Shirley. Shirley, do you want me to introduce you? Do you want to introduce yourself?
You can introduce me.
Shirley does have a townhome, so cares a lot about renters in the community. I can attest to that. Does climate water scientist stuff. It's super vague, but that is what goes on. Lifelong King County resident. Did I get that right? Concerned that renters are often forced to live on polluted arterials. I have heard Shirley scream about this. Shirley cares a lot about the fact that renters are forced to live on polluted arterials, and really concerned about walkable parks, and that park access is restricted sometimes to the most wealthy residents, or in the case of a group that she co-founded, Jackson Park for All, that is devoted, over 1.5 golf courses is devoted just to golf in next to 2 transit stations in District 5. So Jackson Park for All is an awesome group. I encourage folks to connect with Shirley and others in that group. They've got online meeting space, they host in-person events, and they do a lot of cool stuff. So they're a great group to be involved in. Anything else you want to add, Shirley? You're going to talk soon.
Nope, that was perfect.
Cool. Ryan Packer, probably our most famous speaker today, no pressure. Ryan Packer is with the Urbanist. They are a renter, the contributing editor at the Urbanist. And I threw this in just concerned that high housing costs impact the arts in Seattle. Ryan is a big champion of the arts and theater, in particular in Seattle, and definitely impacts high housing costs impacts that. Something that Ryan is well known for, if you don't know, Ryan painfully and painstakingly documents how our streets are designed for traffic violence by calling to attention to every person that is injured or is killed in our streets on an ongoing basis as it happens on social media. So really hard to follow along with that, but super important. And then the reason Ryan was invited today is because I saw them talking on social media about what's going on at community council meetings across King County and in Seattle, and some of the conversations that those homeowner-dominated spaces are having, just to really understand kind of the tensions between the competing interests and the competing understanding of zoning from a longtime homeowner perspective at those community councils, and their kind of goals and the way that they're thinking about this might be different than some of us that are renters are thinking about it. Anything else you want to add, Ryan?
Not really. I just wanted to emphasize, I'm just a citizen journalist basically who was trying to get around the city safely and then fell down a very long rabbit hole that led me to understanding that land use is the root of all of our problems.
Yeah. So we're going to hear now from Shirley. I'm going to stop sharing my screen and share Shirley's slides. And I just really want to emphasize that 31% of renter out households in Seattle do not have cars, compared to 4% of folks that own their home. That's a big difference and has a really important, when we're planning for the future and land use, we really need to be thinking about that imbalance. And yeah, and then after that, I'm going to talk about redlining. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen, which I think is hiding up here.
Oh,
is it working? And I'm
while
gonna
Laura does
yeah.
that, I'll just, while Laura shares my slides, start sharing my slides, I'll just briefly do an introduction of myself in terms of, just wanted to give a caveat that my brain isn't working super well right now because I've had a intense week in my personal life, and then no powers for over 24 hours, for like 24 hours now. So sorry if everything isn't perfectly explained, but please do ask any questions that you guys have as they come up. Especially like if you guys want to type questions in the chat as I go, please feel free.
And I can also keep an eye on the chat and read off the questions too.
Yep, sounds good. Okay, awesome. Slides look good, Laura. All right, so I'm kind of kicking us off because I just want to give a really brief overview of some topics that Laura and Ryan are going to dive deeper into. So this talk is all about why should renters care about the comp plan? And this is my overarching thesis. So if you want just one takeaway, one thing to remember, it's this. So NIMBYism by homeowners in wealthy, exclusive white neighborhoods is class warfare against renters. Building apartments and affordable and social housing in wealthy, exclusive white neighborhoods is how we fight back. That is my overarching thesis for this entire 10 minutes that I'm going to talk for. And I want to caveat that sometimes I'm just going to say we. I'm not a renter. As Laura said, I own a townhouse. But I really care about renters. And so I don't mean to say we to appropriate like the experience of renting right now. I don't have that. I know that it's harrowing out there. But I'm just going to say we for shorthand. So hopefully that's okay with everybody. All right, next. Thanks, Laura. All right, so here are my 4 points about why we need to allow apartments in wealthy white exclusive neighborhoods and why that's good for renters. So first of all, allowing apartments in wealthy white exclusive neighborhoods improves the health and quality of life for renters. Second, lowers housing and rental costs, reducing displacement and long commutes. Third, provides sanctuary from unsafe states and builds political power. And fourth, it enables social housing in many more places. Next. So just, sorry, that's good, Laura. Yeah, so just jumping into a little bit of background on this first point. Next. So my first point is that allowing apartments in exclusive neighborhoods improves the health and quality of life of renters. So you're going to see a lot of maps in my talk because I'm a maps person. Some of these maps are maps I've made because that's just how my brain works. And so I'm going to start by explaining this first map that's with this blue and red right now. So in the places in red, those are the places where apartments are currently allowed to be built in the city of Seattle. Places in light blue do not, like, you can't build apartments there at all. They're banned from those areas. And so as you can see, these light blue areas where apartments are banned is most of the city. So I don't know if you guys spend a lot of time in these light blue places very often, but I sometimes do. Like, for example, I'll just go to Laurelhurst because I honestly just want to go there to make the people there uncomfortable. Sometimes I'll walk there and I will literally see these people who own these mansions with waterfront views hang out on their front lawns, and they've literally made shocked faces at me as I walk by because they're like, what are you doing here? And I honestly enjoy that. So I sometimes do that, but that's the kind of places that many of these places are. So one problem with that is that when you live in these light blue places, you have ready access to these beautiful, giant, large parks, such as like Carkeek, Golden Gardens, Discovery Park, just going down that west side right there. On the east side, you got Magnuson, you got Seward Park, you have the Arboretum, and over in West Seattle, you got Lincoln, and you have other stuff there too. It's kind of the golf course, but there's other stuff next to that, Longfellow Creek. So if you're a renter though, in these red areas, it's a lot harder for you to reach those beautiful large parks. And that's not fair, that's not right. Another thing that living far from these parks, these green spaces and all these trees in the water, is that it gets really hot during heat waves. So over here on the right, I have a map of temperatures on a hot July day. I believe it was like 2014 from satellite. And you can see that the places in red are the hotter places. You can see that these are the places where renters live. These are the places where apartments are allowed. Places where apartments are banned, again, those light blue places, the mansions and everything else, they're the places that stay cooler. And again, that's not fair for renters to not have access to those cool places. And again, those green spaces, those parks, those trees. So I live along Lake City Way in Lake City in my townhome. And when we measured the temperature in 2021 during the wild summer 2021 heat wave, it was over 20 degrees hotter where we were compared to just a few streets away near the water in those exclusive neighborhoods with the big houses. And so it's a very stark difference. The issue is that the proposed plan that the mayor's is proposing for the update to the comp plan, it doubles down on these patterns. So it wants to add more houses where these red parts are that renters are already allowed, and not add as much housing to those light blue parts where renters are already not allowed. And so we say, Jackson Park for All, we say we have to let way more apartments be in these light blue places, and basically everywhere within a 30-minute walk or bike ride or even bus ride of these large parks should allow apartments. Next slide. So another way that banning apartments from these exclusive wealthy white neighborhoods, another way in which that harms renters is that it forces them to live where there's more pollution from cars and where there's more traffic danger. So here on the left, I have a map of average PM 2.5 concentration. So PM 2.5 is just one way to measure air pollution. And you can see that there's a lot of air pollution where there's a lot of cars. So along Lake City Way, along I-5, along Aurora, these are places where, again, renters are living, and they don't have access to those places where there's less pollution. And same, it's another thing where it's just the same exact map. On the right here, Calvin plotted out and posted on Twitter a map of where all the pedestrian fatalities have occurred in our city. And you can see, again, they're concentrated along these places where renters live. So along Aurora, along Lake City Way, along MLK, along Rainier Avenue. And I forgot the name of the street in West Seattle, sorry. But yeah, so the thing is, like, homeowners kind of get the advantage for everything, right? Like, they get high-speed driving. Again, way more homeowners are drivers than renters are. They get convenience and time savings of using those big roads, and none of the pollution. Instead, renters have to deal with the noise, pollution, and dangerous high-speed traffic that these wealthier homeowners are generating. And they're almost shielding those homeowners from those consequences, right? And so again, the proposed zoning updates that the mayor is bringing forth right now is doubling down on this pattern, adding more people, way more people to these places that have pollution and traffic danger than to places that don't, where quality of life can be better for renters. And so again, Jackson Park for All, we say, no, that's not what we should do. We need to add apartments instead, everywhere where there's safe streets to bike on, where there's things like the Berkman Trail, safe places, that you can bike without ever encountering a car, where there's stay healthy streets, where there's neighborhood greenways. Let's just upzone. Oh, sorry, the word upzone is jargon. We need to add apartments in places where people can get around safely. Oh, and another point is that on top of that, there should be apartments everywhere where sidewalks already exist. So when I walk in Laurelhurst sometimes, I'm like, oh my gosh, there's such nice sidewalks here. They're so well maintained, they're big, they connect, okay? And then I'll see just 5 people using it the entire day. In Lake City where I live, super dense area, there aren't sidewalks. And there are hundreds and thousands of people and little kids, whatever, that use it every day. Laurelhurst needs to have apartments. Next slide. All right, that's my longest one, so we're through that. Okay, so the second point is that allowing apartments in wealthy white exclusive neighborhoods lowers housing costs, reducing displacement and long commutes. Next slide. So my thesis here is that allowing apartments in exclusive neighborhoods lowers housing costs. So for an affordable city, we know that we need 3 things. stability, subsidy, and supply for housing. And we know how important stability is. Thanks to Seattle, we have work. People are working on this. So that includes like the right to habitability, right to counsel, rent regulation, including rent control, rent stabilization, right to organize, protection from harassment, tenant opportunity to purchase, just cause eviction clauses, all of that. We know we need that. We know we need subsidy too. We need new taxes and more funding for affordable housing. And we thank How's Our Neighbors for proposing that. We thank other organizations who have worked on that. I put a picture of Cedar Crossing because that's my light rail station is the Roosevelt light rail station. So I just see it all the time. It's so beautiful. I'm so glad that that's there. But something that gets overlooked is the third S, supply. And so here I put a picture of South Lake Union and of Ballard because I think about all the new apartments that went into those neighborhoods over the past like 10 years or maybe 15 years. And I think about how much worse our housing costs would have been if those were never built. Because I think about like all the new tech workers that moved here who are able to live in those houses and not have to compete for cheaper, perhaps older housing with people who make less. So yeah, but then next slide. Again, it matters. Oops, I think we missed one, Laura, sorry. Yeah, perfect. But yeah, as I've been saying, it's not just overall supply that matters. It really matters a lot where we're adding that supply because there are different neighborhoods. There are neighborhoods with different risks of displacement, and some neighborhoods have a lot greater risk of displacement than others. So when we're talking about displacement, we're talking about people getting priced out, them needing to move further away from their jobs, from their communities, from their friends and their family. When people get displaced, they lose those connections, and that really sucks, and we don't want that. And they also often have to end up commuting really far. So like my mom growing up, she had to commute to Belltown or to downtown Seattle, all the way from our neighborhood in Kent Renton area. And that took, I calculated it. It was like, it's worth like 3 years of her life, like all of the commuting she did basically. And that sucks. We don't want people to have to do that. So in order to prevent displacement and prevent this kind of long commuting, we should be adding apartments and new housing where displacement risk is lowest. So this is a map right here of displacement risk. You can see where high risk is in red and low risk in blue. So those places with low risk, as you could probably remember from all the other maps I showed, are also the places that are those exclusive wealthy neighborhoods that have safer streets and more parks, right? So it's like safer streets, more parks, less displacement risk. It's a no-brainer to add more apartments, to add apartments at all, to unban apartments from those neighborhoods. Yep, okay, that's all I wanted to say there. Next slide. The next point is that allowing apartments in wealthy white exclusive neighborhoods provide sanctuary from unsafe states and builds political power. Next slide. So a lot of you have already touched on this, but I just want to really drive this point home because it's so important, especially with what's happening nationally in our politics. So Seattle is one of only a few sanctuary cities in the US where refugees and immigrants can find relative safety. I say relative because it really is just relative. So just so you guys know what a sanctuary city is, I checked on Wikipedia, so it's super official. It's a city that limits or denies its cooperation with the national government in enforcing immigration law. So a city's council and mayor can declare itself a sanctuary city and enact measures and policies that are more welcoming and favorable to migrants. And they can have the city take on responsibilities of receiving the migrants, processing them, and providing services and resources for them to acclimate and live in the country and the communities in which they arrive. So it's really important that Seattle be welcoming to these people. And can we really say we're a sanctuary city if we make it completely unaffordable for people to actually live here? Next slide. So it's not only just being a sanctuary city for immigration and immigrants, though. It's also about many other rights too. As you can see from these two maps, we have some of the more productive abortion rights. We have some of the more productive trans rights. And again, like, if we're not letting people actually come here and afford to live here, are we really do we really have those rights for people? Next slide. And I just want to also emphasize that it's about political power. It's about building political power. The more people we let come here. Jesse on Twitter, one of my favorite people to follow, said it best. So they said, I think more than ever, it is selfish and misguided for blue state cities to refuse to build an appropriate amount of new housing. People aren't going to stop wanting to come to places like Seattle from all over the country, and it's not fair that it be reserved for the elite. And then Jerusalem Dempsis, who is a pro-housing reporter, notes that if places that protect immigrant, trans, and abortion rights don't build more housing, we're going to lose electoral votes and political power nationally. Locally, I would argue that the more we welcome more new renters, the more we're going to be able to pass more progressive policies that keeps protecting renters too. And again, those best places to house these newcomers will be in those once exclusive neighborhoods. Next slide. My last point is that allowing apartments in wealthy white exclusive neighborhoods enables social housing in many more places. Next slide. I bet based on who's here that you guys already know a lot about social housing, but the 4 pillars of social housing is that it's publicly owned in perpetuity, permanently affordable, free from market speculation, and promotes and includes cross-class communities. If you want to learn more, go to houseourneighbors.org. Next slide. So I just went to their website and stole this image. I know some of the people who worked on this are in this talk today. So if they want to comment more and tell us more about it, that would be great. But this is an example of a social housing project that could get built based on what we already passed, I-135 in the city of Seattle. And this is actually at a location in Northgate, a real place that could have social housing. But next slide. The issue is that these types of housing aren't allowed in those exclusive neighborhoods right now, and they wouldn't be allowed in the mayor's proposed comprehensive plan update. So if we want social housing to really be able to take off in our city, we need to make sure that these kinds of buildings, apartments, and other kinds of dense, sustainable, and efficient housing are allowed everywhere, including in those neighborhoods. That's it for me. Sorry if that was over time. Thanks. Passing back to Laura.
That was great, Shirley. I just want to take a moment and everyone can it's a pretty heavy presentation, especially in light of we know that with the 600,000 people without power, we know exactly who's being impacted in our community right now. And that was the lowest low that was ever recorded in the Pacific Ocean. And all of this is also connected to climate and other things. So it's funny, I'm the one who's talking about ocean when you're the ocean and water expert, but of course. I don't know who's here, and if you're here and you want to do a little react emoji and do like a thumbs up if you're a renter, just so I know how many renters are here. See, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 7 renters, 8 renters. That's a good amount of renters. The renter movement needs we need people that own housing and own businesses in our city that don't even live in our city to care about renters also. So if you're not a renter and you're at a renters workshop, absolutely awesome. That is, solidarity is really important, and it's a verb. It's not just a hashtag, right? So if you are here and you own property, your voice sometimes counts double at city council. Sometimes it counts double at a meeting. Sometimes it sure as heck counts double on KUOW. It counts double in the Seattle Times, right? So there's so many ways that renters are considered we haven't grown up yet, or we haven't figured our stuff out yet, or we haven't it's just we're transitory in the neighborhood. You live in somewhere for 15 years in a neighborhood and you're not committed to that community in some people's eyes, but you could have owned a property for 6 months and all of a sudden you get invited to all of the stuff. And there's one community council in Seattle. I don't think they've changed the rules yet, where if you don't own property, you don't get to vote at their community council. So it's like, that's kind of what's so frustrating about these land use decisions for me. So that was my little soapbox. We're gonna get to breakout sessions after this. Does anyone here feel comfortable? I guess I'm gonna do the other way. A thumbs up if you are like beyond at the beginning level of understanding redline. So a thumbs up if you could like explain to the person sitting next to you, if we were in person, what redlining is. So if you could tell someone on the bus, hey, this is what redlining is in a couple of sentences. You don't have to be an expert at it, but just to have some idea, be able to talk to someone else about what redlining is. Awesome. Okay, well, I'm going to talk about it pretty fast then. If I go too fast, please slow down in the chat, or let Kate know you want to slow down. You want me to slow down. So this is a presentation I did at Wallingford's Lincoln High School. I presented to 5 classes 2 years ago, 5 history classes. I went in and I did a presentation about redlining in Wallingford historic districts. I was invited by teachers who had seen an article or seen on the news about it. And I went and talked to students in the school. They had presentations by me as well as the historic Wallingford folks. And they came to some very strong, strong conclusions on their own about how they felt about the historic district. It was pretty wonderful. It was a wonderful experience. So I highly recommend all of you that just said that you're comfortable talking about redlining to try to get in front of a group of youth, to try to get to speak in schools. The history teachers in Seattle Public Schools are interested in teaching real history. And they do want to teach this history. Another thing under attack across our country is the right to tell the truth about history. And if you don't know about that, I recommend following Jesse Hagopian, who does a lot of work and writes books about that topic. So something in Seattle I feel like is really interesting. There's the story, Reverend Samuel McKinney, pastor of Mount Zion Baptist Church at 19th and Madison. And he said a testimony, I think this was back in 1976, the year I was born. We didn't know it was called redlining. All we did know was when we went to get to the bank to get a loan, we couldn't get it. So red meant that an area was hazardous or less desirable. This was the security map. You know, there was 1st grade, 2nd grade, 3rd grade, 4th grade, sparsely built up area, commercial and undeveloped or farmland. So this is kind of like, this stuff is still very much in play. This is still how people think about land today. 4th grade red was the hazardous or least desirable area. This is a video we're not going to watch from the history of redlining. It was produced by Eric Keto at the King County. And I will share this in like the resources afterwards. This was an American Community Survey. The data is pretty old, from 2019, around renter households, owner versus renter households in terms of by race. So if you look at Black folks, Pacific Islander communities, Hispanic folks, versus like white folks, you can really see the disparity of renting versus owning in Washington. So this is Reverend McKinney's wife and children. Super great picture. There's a long quote where he tells the story of trying to go get loans from 5 banks, getting turned down, having to go all the way to Pennsylvania. And he got folks in the community to give money and outside the city, and they were able, there was a lot of stuff going on at that time. So dig into that story and learn about the Mount Zion Baptist Church at 19th Madison. Also, this is an example of public testimony, so that's another foreshadowing of one of the action steps. Be Seattle always asks people in a workshop to take an action, so if you can't stay to the end, we are going to ask you to take some actions. One of them is going to be to roll up your sleeves and carve out some time in the new year to do public testimony. Once the zoning maps that are up for comment right now, they're going to go to council as legislation. I think that was just put into play yesterday, and then you'll get a chance to go speak to them, speak at council in winter. So this, if you don't for some reason get to comment by the 20th of December, there'll still be more time for you to comment in the new year. So this last part of the quote here, we received a loan of $430,000 and are paying it back. It was just another attempt we felt on the part of white system to try to keep Black and other poor folks from trying to achieve their dreams. We didn't know it was called redlining. All we did know was when we went to the bank, we couldn't get a loan, we couldn't get it. And I feel like this also mirrors, people don't need to know what zoning is or redlining or displacement or any of these words to feel it, to feel the zoning, to feel when they cross that street and all of a sudden there's more trees, or they cross the street and all of a sudden the sidewalks are fixed. So you don't need to know zoning to feel it in your like daily life. So I just want everyone to like kind of close your eyes and think right now, what type of home do you want to live in one day, 4 years from now, 10 years from now, and 40 years from now? And if you're an older adult, you can look back and think about the kind of housing you lived in 10 years ago or 40 years ago. So the reason I remember, this is the same exact presentation I did for those kids in Wallingford. This was a fascinating discussion, hearing the types of housing they wanted to live in 4 years from now, 10 years from now, and 40 years from now. It was super interesting. So I wish I could share all that with you. But again, go talk to youth, hear about their dreams, and hear about how land use has kind of, for some of them, limited their dreams. That's always not great when you hear kids like pre-limiting their dreams. But there was a lot of that going on in the classroom. The other thing I taught them about was like all the steps to get a mortgage. We talked about what does it mean to get a mortgage? What are all the things you have to do? Just explaining how complicated it is. Not that renting isn't complicated, but all the ways that you can get kind of discriminated against in this process. And just helping them understand that it's super stressful. We also talked about generational wealth. That was a great discussion. A lot of here people hopefully all know what generational wealth is. If it's not, if you don't, you've probably experienced it, even if you don't know the word. We talked about this family. We talked about these maps. So we talked about these maps. These maps are very similar to all the maps that Shirley showed you. The one on the right is the redlining map. But the colors on the map on the right aren't like the pink doesn't necessarily mean the red. I guess the red does mean red. Yeah, the red is hazardous on the right. So you can see kind of industrial zones were red, and that's where folks were concentrated through racial covenants. So we also talked about that. We talked about the racial and social equity maps that organizations like Housing Development Consortium and others fought for those maps to be part of the record of City of Seattle's decision making. Basically we have so much data and research and history to show that our zoning is bad, and hopefully, and the thing to really convince people is like we can and we should make changes. So I'm just going to go. We talked about modern day redlining, how Wells Fargo rejected half its Black applicants in the mortgage and refinancing boom, and how these things that are experienced by folks back many years ago, and for these kids 1976 was like the 1910s. that it's still happening today. We talked about Redfin had to pay $4 million over a digital redlining settlement. We talked about, this is Tom from Bike Blog, Seattle Bike Blog, talking about 1930s maps of racist redlining predict air pollution levels today. So, Shirley talked about it, but it was good to talk about it with the students. Again, they grew up in Seattle, they've experienced it. We talked about being unbanked. What does it mean to be unbanked, and how folks that are from American Indian and Alaska Native communities have the highest rates of being unbanked at 16.3%. And how that was rising because of the pandemic, and how that impacts your ability to have housing stability and generational wealth. And then we asked, what might we do? So I got them real mad. These kids were very mad by the end of my conversation with them. And we said, what could we do to address today's racial wealth collapse? So we talked about policies that support homeownership. I am not against homeownership at all. The city of Seattle has some very unique ideas of how they want to support homeownership. There's great organizations that do that. But those are kind of the exceptions. It's very, very, those firms are very poorly funded, and they're kind of very unique and special circumstances that happen. Community-led development like Africatown, employment education opportunities that lead towards people helping, restore their credit, that helps them then apply for loans. There's a lot of public health issues that go along with this. If you're not in good health, it's hard to get that stability. You deal with medical debt, and then medical racism. So I did not leave anything out with these youth. More, yes, I will find some more unbanking resources. The folks that do advocacy around statewide cooperative banking or public banking have a lot of more information on that too. We talked about racial covenants. So that means that in the deeds to the homes, it says, folks from a certain background, if you're Japanese or Chinese or Jewish or Black, basically anyone who wasn't white couldn't live in the community. And that's how they kind of enforced the making people only be able to live in the areas that were considered hazardous. And then we talked about historic districts. That was super fun. How unique these homes were that they were sold in a catalog. This is an example of Y. King and Triana and Teresa Mosqueda, who was on council at the time, and Harold, and they were celebrating Homestead Community Land Trust and affordable home ownership in the Central District. I was presenting to a school, so I had to be very fair and balanced in my presentation, not snarky or disrespectful to any of our public officials. So again, what might Seattle residents do today to undo and account for the impacts of redlining? How does this disproportionately impact renters? So I'm going to have you do what I had the kids do. So we're going to get into breakout sessions for 10 minutes, and I want you to answer that. The other things you can do, we're going to get to that in a minute. The bonus question, if you run out of time, is how is this connected to school funding and school segregation? So, what might Seattle residents do to undo and account for the impacts of redlining? How does this disproportionately impact renters? And how does this connect to school segregation? And the reason I'm asking these questions is these might start forming the basis of your comment that you give to the city about the zoning plan. So Kate, you want to put us in some breakout rooms? I think it's going to be groups of 3 for 10 minutes. Yes, I'll put the questions in the chat. And Shirley, you have the choice whether to take this break and have they have to say what their group said. You can put it in the chat, you can raise your hands. Shirley, you don't get to share. You weren't in a room. I know you were eavesdropping. So anyone, was it all secret? Nobody wants to tell me what they said. Is everyone being like Seattle, like polite, like you go, no, you go, no, you go? I didn't say the thing where it's like designate somebody to be the sharer. If you share, try to share your own stories. If you share someone else's story, try to anonymize it. You can post in the chat your thoughts. What's one thing that you want to do to account for the impacts of redlining? What is one way that it disproportionately impacts renters? And how is this connected to school segregation? Saunders. Hopefully you can unmute yourself.
Oh, sorry. Oh, yeah, it's Sanders.
Sanders, sorry.
Yes. Yeah, one thing we mentioned in our group is that it feels like the way that Seattle is currently zoned and set up is similar to segregation, where certain parts of the city are relegated to or are like set aside for people who have status, like waterfront and parks and things like that. And then other parts of the city are only or available to you just because you don't have that status and you don't have that wealth. So making it so that everyone of any type of class can live anywhere in the city and structuring our city and building our city out so that it supports that, I think is how you can make that change.
Thanks for sharing that.
I just realized that when everyone came back from the breakout room, our video settings changed and no one was able to turn on your video. But if you're someone who likes to have your video on, I have it fixed, so you can turn it back on if you want to be in the room with us.
Is it still recording? Okay. I just want to make sure I just want to make people sure know if it's recording or not. Patricia, I'm going to read your statement unless you want to read it. Societal structure is very complex and declining. I was at a complete loss to address redlining. I see the biases are generational since Civil War and World War II and adamantly held by avoidance and denial. Oof, that's rough. I wish you were in that classroom with me because, you know, when you're 15, 16 years old, they had like, you know, we can do this, right? So it was nice to be around that that energy. But I agree, Patricia, it definitely feels like that right now. Extra. That was our breakout session. Anybody else want to say anything else? Universal design, Alexandria, love it. It's a sad history that this country didn't even have curbs until 1990. I did not know that. Today I learned. Infrastructure can be hostile. 1990, oof. I was a freshman in high school. I was in Santa Monica, so I was really spoiled. We had really good sidewalks there. So I did not experience bad sidewalks in high school. Except for the trees kind of. So again, this was for students. This was part of a history class. I was at a school. I had to be very careful what I was presenting. So there was a lot of references. So I told them about the comprehensive plan. I told them about racial covenants. There was that KQED, how government redlining pushed segregation in California. That's really good. Santa Monica has the highest curves. See, I did not ride a bike there. I should have known that. But yeah, so these references were really helpful in my conversation. I do want to shift the tone. Shirley, do you want to do your chant before or after the break? I think it might be fun to send off folks to their 5-minute break with your chant. Are you up for it?
Sure.
I know it's not your chant. It was Jackson Park for All's chant. I don't have, it looks like it's cutting off the bottom.
That's probably fine.
Do you want me to, here, let me try to for a second.
Okay. I also have,
See it now?
oh yeah, that works.
Okay.
Okay, so I know that like hearing lectures all for like an hour or something can get boring. So I wanted to spice things up a little bit by just coming up with like a silly rhyme that can get stuck in your head that sums up everything that hopefully you learned from us so far. And one bit of background that you need that isn't already there is that Michael Hubner is one of the people in the city of Seattle that's leading the comprehensive plan updates right now. And so that's who Hubner is. Harrell is Mayor Harrell. Okay, now I will give the chant. So it goes, Harrell and Hubner hoarding our trees, kissing asses of propertied NIMBYs. First comes displacement due to high rents, then comes 2-hour commutes from Kent. Harrell and Hubner hoarding our trees, denying entry to our sanctuary. First they redline, then they downzone, then they force renters onto dangerous roads. But Harrell and Hubner have opportunities to make a green and just city. First comes apartments next to parks, then comes social housing around Seaward Park. There you go. So get that stuck in your head like I have now for like the past week. Thanks, everyone.
So on that note, we're going to take a break at 7:10. We're a little behind schedule, but not too far. We're going to take a 5-minute break till 7:15, and then we will hear from Ryan Packer. But yeah, so 7:15, come back. Everyone can take a break, stretch, water, snacks.